Dubrovnik, as the town goes, is no secret, and it certainly hasn't been removed from any state dignitaries or royalties or other visitors, tourists from all over the world. Today in our special show, we have a particular, very special lady, Lady Mary. Welcome to our show. Pleased to have you here.
It's a great pleasure to be here. This is where we come for our holidays very often.
So I hear this is, well, it's been more than 10 times, I imagine.
Yes. Yes, we keep coming back. We go to Šipan, the island of Šipan. And of course, when we first came, we went to Dubrovnik so that we could get to know the country. And we stayed at the Villa Dubrovnik, which was lovely. And well, when we were there one day, the man came who drove the motorboat, the speedboat. And we said to him that we would like to go and see the islands. And so he took us in his boat very, very fast. And we went all around the Elafiti, how do you say it?
Elafiti Islands.
Elafiti Islands. And he said, now we will stop for lunch. And so we went into the bay in Šipan, and we stopped and went to the restaurant Marco and had the most delicious lunch. And then we came back to Šipan, and that was it. We'd fallen in love.
And ever since you've been going back to it?
And ever since we've been going back to Šipan.
I see. Well, it's no secret you traveled widely.
We have traveled quite a lot in the world, yes, we have.
How do you find, perhaps one shouldn't compare and contrast places, they're all unique in their own way, but how do you find Dubrovnik? Does it speak to you, and the whole region?
The whole region, I think, it's sufficiently rural. I am, after all, a Scot, and I came from a very rural part of the country. And what I see around Dubrovnik and in the islands is that there's still a lot of rural life going on, and a lot of course the sea is always a great big attraction. And the colour of the sea here is just magic.
Are you a good swimmer?
Hopeless.
Oh, I wouldn't say so. Let us all be reminded, if you're not sport historians, that actually the major sport in town, water polo, as I'm sure you well know, was started by a Scot, William Wilson, the father of polo.
I find this amazing because of the Scottish climate, which is pretty harsh.
It is indeed. I think it was started in the rivers, or regardless of it.
And the lakes, I expect. In the lochs, we say.
In the lochs. Well, yeah. I won't even try to pronounce that. English being a foreign language to me and all. However, there are some great, great moments in the Coombe country as well, I should say. It's also rural. It's very rural, although it's very close to London. It's only 80 miles from London. Quite close to it. And yet, when you get to a certain point after Reading and Newbury, you find yourself in real country. And we are in a sort of area which is surrounded by large estates. I imagine Earl Marshall still didn't have problems finding you back in 62. No, the Earl Marshal knew my parents, and of course my father was a personal friend of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, because they were in Scotland as young people together, and so he knew her quite well. And so that's how I came to be invited, age 19, to be a maid of honour at the coronation. Before we discuss a bit further of it, and perhaps learn an anecdote or two without imposing to you, I would like to show our viewers a little clip of it. Yes, please do. Letter arrived for me, and not for my parents, but for me, inviting me to be a maid of honour at the coronation. And you were 19 at the time, if I'm not mistaken. And this seemed to me to be extraordinary and very exciting, of course. Luckily, my parents had kept some scrapbooks or photograph books of the previous coronation of George VI and Queen Elizabeth, because my father had taken part in that. He had carried the ivory rod with the dove on the top in the Queen Mother's procession. So I was able to look at these wonderful old books and see what was involved.
Of course, our role for this coronation, this last one, was more prominent because we were attending on Her Majesty, and she was the one that was being crowned. So it was incredibly exciting.
Being 19 years old, although trained for months, drilled into it, if you will, into the whole program, you didn't know what to do. However, you must have felt very special feelings at the time. You must have felt very special excitement at the time. How was it?
It was extraordinary. I think the thing that lifted it up for me particularly, almost immediately after, as soon as we started to process, the music which came, it just resounded all around the Abbey. And the Abbey is the most wonderful old building. And I felt as if I was almost floating, although I was carrying this heavy train. And the prickles kept on coming up back of my neck. I was so excited.
Must have been so
but
wonderful.
Of course I couldn't be excited. I had to be very, very well trained and behave quite beautifully.
As you well did.
As I did. Oh yes, I did.
And now, some years later, we don't have to specify how many, but the whole crew, if I may, or the 6 maids of honor gathered. And how was that experience?
It was great fun. We had a good time. We all went, we were invited to the Abbey for the service to commemorate the coronation. The Queen came and all the royal family. And we were sitting right up at the top of the aisle, as it were, in the block beside the royal family. So we couldn't have been closer, really. And as soon as the music started, I asked about my colleagues if they had the same experience, and they said they did. 60 years just disappeared, and we felt that we were taken straight back.
Amazing.
And we were walking along on that carpet again, carrying the train and doing all the right things. And it was a wonderful, wonderful feeling, actually.
Sounds wonderful. Did it impact your life in terms of an understanding, a new understanding you've gotten, and perhaps even of yourself, having gone through that ceremony?
I think so. I think that the thing that was so incredibly impressive was the Queen's behaviour. The Queen was so serene and so completely under control, as she has always been. And it was a very long service, but it was also very ancient. And every part of it was sort of had hundreds of years of duty incorporated into it. And she never she just didn't, she just carried on through. And there was a particular moment when she was putting on the white robe over the coronation dress, and she sat on the throne there and in this white robe, and she looked so incredibly vulnerable and young. And although we were a bit younger, I think we all felt, goodness, she is taking on a huge burden.
Well, if I may say so, in retrospect, she did quite well. and Her Majesty was quite young herself. She was, I believe, maybe 27 or so
yes,
at the time.
I think that's right.
Yes. Now let us go back to Coombe for a moment, which is interesting to us because the area, rural as it is, seems so much in tune somehow with the area that you might find around Dubrovnik. We do have the Elafiti archipelago, which has become so.
Sadly, we don't
so
have that.
So, well,
we have hills.
The Green Sea.
A green sea, yes. Actually, when we left the other day, it was a gold sea because they had quite a good harvest, and so all the fields had been cut.
I see.
And it looked, well, it looked golden, the whole valley.
And you, within the valley, in the Coombe mansion, or part of it, in fact it's a barn if I'm not mistaken.
Well, there's the barns and they're separate from the house.
Right. And that's where you hold wedding ceremonies, I believe. You let out for them.
Yes. We let it out, and the people could either they have a civil license, in which case they get married actually in the barn, or they get married in a church nearby, and then they come to the barns for their celebrations, dancing and
I see.
music and food and all of that.
Although you've traveled widely, as we already established, I'm sure you have some kind of or had, rather, prior to coming here, perhaps you had a bit of preconception about what you would find. Did you see that the picture or the life you found here or encounters matched what you expected priorhand?
No, not really. I think that, I don't know, it doesn't really, there isn't a parallel, you know, they're completely different.
I see.
But apart from the fact that where we live is an ancient part of the world and there's a lot of history attached to it. And the same thing here in Dubrovnik and in the Elefiti Islands, there's a lot of history.
Indeed.
And I think that that is something that if you've been brought up in that sort of atmosphere, you understand much more and you can identify with.
Well, we thank you very much. We are pleased to have had you on our program.
A pleasure.
We had a pleasure and honor of conversing with Lady Mary. Now we continue our conversation of our special emission with David Russell, her husband. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's very nice to be on the show.
Very pleased to have you here and to continue this discussion, if you will, of how do you find our region? We heard Lady Mary say nice things of it. What attracted you, perhaps you both, or just yourself, to Dubrovnik and the region?
Well, we came to Dubrovnik, as Mary said, and we loved the town. I mean, it's a very beautiful town. And it also has the advantage of being small enough that you can really see around it quite quickly.
Yes.
And there is a tremendous amount to see, and as she said, history is everywhere.
Indeed.
And all around is beautiful countryside. And as she said, we found ourselves exploring the islands, and I remember the day very well. The sea was absolutely glass calm. And the fellow who was driving the boat stopped the speedboat in one of between the islands, and there was a dolphin, or a porpoise, I'm not sure which it was, and he tapped the side of the boat. And he said, they're very curious, and indeed, he came right up and put his nose right up out of the water.
Wow.
And we then went all round, and we then had this marvelous lunch at Codmarca, where we have been going ever since. And that is one of the reasons that we keep on coming back.
I see.
But the countryside in Xipan is so natural and so beautiful. And when you look out onto the bay in the evening with the sunset, with the hills on both sides going up from the water's edge of the bay, and you see the mountains in the background, it's one of the greatest views I think you'll find anywhere in the world.
Thank you very much, I should say, on behalf of all of us here.
No, it's a beautiful place.
Naturally, it is, I think, natural for most people, if not all people, to feel a certain pride in terms of where they come from and in terms of the places they live in. But is there a certain connectedness or a parallel you find between Coombe and the region here?
Yes, and the other thing which I'd also like to mention about Xipan is that we've met so many nice and lovely people there who really become real friends. So when you come back, you feel you're back in the family again, which is another great asset. Yes, the countryside where we live, we're incredibly lucky to live where we live. We come out of our front door and we've got a small manor house in the country, and there is a 12th century church on the right-hand side about 30 or 40 yards away. And when you come out of the front door and you look, you can see nothing but countryside. You can't see another house. There are houses there, but you can't see them.
You know they're there, but you can't,
you can't see them. And it's a beautiful place. A lot of birds, a lot of animals. On occasions you see deer quite often. And we're very lucky to live there, I must say.
Yes. This is the most beautiful, well, in some terms, the most beautiful time of the year to visit here. Still, I'm surprised how congested the downtown can get, downtown Dubrovnik. But as soon as you pass those walls, you can fairly walk around and you can see things and you can move and you can experience ease of living, leisure, if you will. Do you find that you traveled widely yourself. Do you find that perhaps here still, on the crossroads between East and West, in Croatia or in coastal Croatia, do you find that perhaps we'll still kind of, in terms of speed, in terms of changes, do you find that we are still at some kind of a leisurely pace, or perhaps a pace more suited to normal than most of the Western speedy world?
I think Xipan, I mean, there are people around, of course there are, because people live there, but it is a very peaceful, natural place. And I think you do get the feeling, you know, that you're maybe going back in time to some degree. But then you come into Dubrovnik, as we did this morning, and you've never seen so many people walking past you in the street, and you realize you're very much, you know, in the lived-in world.
I see.
But again, I mean, where we are in the country at home, we see people all the time, but I mean, there's no crowds. I mean, you see individual people, and if you take your car out, which we do, because that's the only way really you get from one place to another, because we're right in the middle of the country, a lot of people think that there's nobody else on the roads, which can be very dangerous, but there are very few cars on the roads. So it's nice from that point of view.
Yes. You are quite engaged with Southern Sinfonia, which is, for those who don't know, perhaps our audiences ought to get acquainted a bit. It is actually a very good orchestra, which performs in southern England. I think pieces dating back to 17th century all the way through contemporaries.
No, I think we tend to concentrate on the classical repertoire as opposed to the modern repertoire, because I mean, you probably know about professional orchestras. It is very difficult for them to make sufficient money from the ticket prices alone. You have to have subsidy of some kind or other, which is why we find ourselves continually engaged in fundraising.
So I've heard, in fact, in a bit of a research, I've heard that you are actually crucial to it. In fact, that your great efforts have really helped Southern Sinfonia to actually be able to perform.
Well, I think that's, well, it's kind of you to say so, but I think it is true to some extent. We do have a little festival which we call Evenings at Coombe in October. And on the first night, we raise money for the NSPCC, which is the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children, and another organization called the CPRE, which is the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. Then on the Saturday night, which is the main night, we raise money for this, for the orchestra. And that is very important.
I've heard that some of the contributors, I should say, said, all right, Mr. Russell, we can do that, but however, in turn, you ought to perhaps recite us a poem or sing us a song. Was there a situation like it?
Yes, well, let me explain how it works. We used to turn one of the barns into a complete theatre, and with a rake, so the seats went up, like that, and with a production board at the top here. Now what we do is we make it more into a cafe cabaret environment, and we raise the stage, and we have people sitting at tables. And in the first half we have what I would term as classical cabaret. So we have a marvelously good internationally known violinist playing, and we have one of the best mezzo-sopranos coming to sing with us. And they are singing more of a classical, more of a serious repertoire. And then in the second half, I introduce the cabaret from the piano. Why do I do this? Because I sing to the sponsors, and they quite enjoy that. And if singing to the sponsors is going to raise £4,000, well, they have to suffer my singing.
I see.
And then I hand over to the real professionals, who are all West End, experts, and they sing more of an accepted cabaret repertoire of Cole Porter, Gershwin, and those sort of songs.
Well, our audiences are used to some kind of a performance, and they're quite kind, I assure you. So perhaps I could compel you to maybe, if you'd like, perhaps you could recite us a song, perhaps a poem. Ask.
Well, I'll look. I will try. I will try. So after I finish singing to the sponsors, I then usually say to them, I think I'm going to risk singing to you another song before I hand over to the professionals. And the song that I've actually written for them this year is called Ask. And it goes, I hope your audience is very tolerant.
They are
Always
quite
ask a question,
supportive.
don't be shy. Stand up and be counted, come on, give it a try. Always look Dame Fortune straight in the eye, and then you'll see doors will swing wide open, 'cause they'll know you're a proper person, not just for show. Time to give the world a big hello. Stay cool, hang free. Life is out there waiting, take your share. Why not? It's your due. You've got a lot of friends who really care, rooting hard for you. Always ask the question, then you'll find it'll serve you well. Ask and be a savior, well, why not? Ask and change behavior on the spot. Ask should be your call. Ask is one and all.
Allow me to be the first to give you a hand. I'm sure our audiences will
I think I'm very
love
tolerant
that.
to have asked me to do that.
Well, perhaps I've taken a step extra, but I think it was well worth it. Thank you so very much for being on the show. Thank you for the poem.
Not at all.
And we do hope to see you around town, around the region, many, many more times.
Well, I must say it is always a pleasure to come back. It always lifts our spirits when we get here.
Pleased to hear that.
Well, thank you very much for asking me.
That was Lady Mary and her husband, David Russell, with us tonight. Please stay with the show.